Hey there, welcome back to episode 2 of 16 Stops a Podcast, and I'm here with Brandon Talbot.
What up?
And we are super excited to be back for a second episode. We had a great first episode, Brandon. We had a great time. We had some technical issues that we worked through, which is like, it's par for the course.
Yeah, first episode.
But first episode, of course. And I just want to thank everyone for the support, just privately and publicly from friends and colleagues and stuff, and for sharing the podcast with people. It's been awesome. The response has been unbelievable, Brandon. So,
did you say this morning that we passed 1,000 views?
Yeah, over 1,000 views, and now over 100 subscribers.
Because I think we started we had like 30, in the 30s. I think you posted it on your channel, and we got like 30 subs, and after the first episode, we're over 100. So that's freaking rad.
Yeah, for sure. And we really do appreciate if you enjoy this content, sharing it with your friends, privately or publicly, whatever. It's greatly appreciated. And just a reminder, we do really want to involve everyone on the podcast. So please send in your questions, comments, topic ideas to 16stopspodcast at gmail.com. There's listed in the description down below. All right, so today's episode, we're going to talk mainly about the new Canon releases and what that really means for Canon and also other companies, but really get into the two cameras and stuff that they released. But first, like usual, we'll talk about some news and some general stuff first. So big news in our personal camera stuff. Brandon, you got an FX3?
I did. I'm shooting on it right now.
Okay, me too. Samesies.
Are you shooting with the Sigma 28 still?
Yeah, are you using that too?
Yes, I am.
Wow, this is embarrassing. We have the same gear. At least we have different microphones and stuff, and you looks like you got a legit podcast mic now. So
yeah, it's basically that time where Britney and Justin Timberlake showed up in matching denim outfits, I think, to the Grammys. That's what's just happened.
I had this thought, I didn't tell you about this, Brandon, where we should literally just wear the same stuff one day and see what happens,
That'd be kind of fun. I can't get my beard to look like yours, but yeah, that would be fun.
I'm not trimming mine up, but either way, I'll wear some glasses like yours, and it'll be cool. Anyways, so I don't know if we want to get too much into that, but I mean, I'm excited for you to have an FX3 and start playing with it. Do you want to talk about any of your first impressions, or save that for another time? Or
no. I like the quick and dirty is that it is a pretty frictionless camera. I am really impressed by the autofocus, especially in low light when compared to like my C70 or my R5C. It just picks up on that eye so darn fast. The new menus, I never got to use the Sony when they had the old menus, but the new menus are very easy. Dare I say easier than my Canons, but I am, I'm not ready to switch quite yet. I need to do some more testing. There are some workflow, hang-ups, things like not having false color or waveforms is kind of gnarly. The screen isn't nearly as good. So I don't know yet, but I love how small it is. I got this with like the Sigma 28 to 70 2.8, and that is like half the footprint of the R5C with the 15 to 35. So
yeah, it definitely lowers the friction in a lot of ways. And I think that new menu system is not, I think some people just took it for granted, but I found it to be really helpful in like really streamlining my workflow as someone who has used a lot of the older Sony menus, both the original version of the new version and the old version. It definitely has streamlined a lot, and I've just stopped using the function button altogether. I just use that main menu, like two screens. Almost everything's in there. So very, very cool. Well, I'm excited to like hear more about it. And yeah, obviously I'm a fan of the FX3. I use it for all different things, and of course recording on it today. All right, so other news is I'm hitting 15,000 on 15,000 subs. Thank you so much. It's just mind blowing every time this stuff happens, and it's funny because if you don't know, my other channel, the farming channel, I have over 200,000 subscribers, and it never gets old. Like these milestones, it's so many people, and I just thank everyone for the support. So, anyways, I just want to
congrats, Josh.
Thank you.
No. I mean that's a big deal because like. There are so many people on YouTube that have done this for a really long time and their channels aren't growing. And I'm sure it's frustrating. So like you hitting 15,000, even though it might not be 200,000, it's not a million. Like it's still, it's a big deal, especially since it's your second channel. This isn't like your main channel. So good work, buddy. I'm happy for you.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, I it's like humbling, and we get caught up in these analytics and these numbers, and then you're like 15,000 people. That's so many people. Even 1,000 people is a lot of people. So yeah, and this, I guess it kind of is my main channel now that I'm not posting on the farming channel, but hey, you know.
We like it. Hey, real quick before we get into it, I just wanted to let everybody know that I am 2 days into COVID, and so if I sound like garbage, if I'm like sniffly, I apologize, but I didn't want to like not do the second episode. This consistency is really important to me. So I have about 300 milligrams of caffeine here that we will chug, some Dayquil. We're gonna make this happen.
So if Brandon doesn't exude confidence in his ability to to be consistent, I don't know what else is. I also love that you measure caffeine in milligrams. Like for me, it's like, oh, I had 1 cup of coffee. You're like, oh no.
Coffee's deceptive. There's actually like a really interesting study that was done on Starbucks coffee, and the variant of amount of caffeine in the same exact cup. Like if they took a 20 ounce, like on Monday, it might have like 200 milligrams, but by the end of the week, it might have had 500 milligrams. So that's why I don't measure it by cups. Like I'm very calculated, and I don't drink coffee. I hate coffee. It's gross. So I know that there's 300 milligrams of caffeine in here. I've already had 1 can. So I'm just sipping on this one. This is the IV drip feed that I need to make it through the next hour and a half.
I could probably talk about caffeine, coffee, and all that stuff for a long time, especially because I do like to get a little bit nerdy with brewing coffee, but we're not going to get into that in this. This is like another whole thing.
Great. I would be a horrible co-host.
Okay, so let's not. Well, all right, we're trying to figure out what not to talk about. All right, let's talk about cameras. That's what we're supposed to talk about here. All right, so some news this week. We had a couple of releases from Nikon. They released their 85 f1.2, which is a very professional high-end lens. People are very excited about. They also released a 26 millimeter f2.8 pancake lens. This is, of course, for their Z-mount cameras. So that lens looks really cool. It's super tiny. I obviously don't have a Nikon camera, but I just wanted to, say that those came out.
It exists.
Yeah, it exists, and also. I've heard that Nikon is now limiting some of the third-party lenses. Did you hear about this, Brandon?
Just very briefly, and I find it very interesting.
So what I heard was it's not like the Canon thing where they're just like no third-party, but they're not letting manufacturers make lenses that they already make.
That makes sense. Like the same focal lengths, same apertures, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so like no one can make a 24-70 f2.8 or whatever. And so it's interesting in a few ways. One thing is like this is what Sony used to do. So if you look at some of the third-party lenses, they don't quite match. Like there'll be like a 25 millimeter or a 28-75, or like a weird, or like Tamron came out with a 17-28, or like there was different lenses that didn't directly compete. And so I think it's not a terrible strategy. At least people can make third-party lenses. So I don't know. It's worked for Sony, so maybe it's going to be okay.
The focal lengths that everybody knows about, whenever their friend is like recommending a lens, oh, get the 24-70. Now it means like they have the only 24-70. So they've got like the real estate that they want, but it's not a complete like, hey, nobody can, build next to us type of thing. And sometimes those like odd focal lengths are kind of fun, like I'll take a 21. I like the 21 millimeter instead of the 24. I'll take a 30 instead of a 35. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and obviously that strategy worked for Sony. So, but it just sounds so bad limiting third-party lenses right now. That's like,
yeah,
come on, Canon. Anyways.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get into that.
Sigma released their new 50 millimeter f1.4 DGDN art lens. So that's a mirrorless lens for E mount and L mount, which was anticipated. They've replaced all of the art lenses, all the main ones, like the 25, 24, 35, and 85, now going from that DSLR style to the mirrorless. So good to see the 50. I saw some reviews. It looks like a killer value for like $800-900.
Yeah, it's Sigma is doing a bang up job. I've just had great experiences with their lenses, and if I do migrate into the Sony ecosystem, even though I'm not like a big 50 shooter, that just seems like a really killer combo. If you had like a 15-35 type of lens, I've got that like a 16-28 coming, and then if I had a 50 along with it, that's a great 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I've liked all the Sigma lenses I've ever used, and so I'm always like, should I get Sigma? Should I get native? Like get the OEM brand? It's always kind of a toss up, especially in that price point. I mean, you compare that with you have the 50 1.4 Zeiss lens, which the planar lens, which is a really nice lens. Like I've owned that lens; it's beautiful. It is a little bit older though, and then you have the 51.2 G Master for $2,000. And then you also have the 55 Zeiss 1.8, which is a really cool lens. I don't know if you know that little guy, but that's like a 10-year-old lens. And then there is rumors of Sony coming out with a new 51.4 G Master. I don't know. I think the rumors say it should come out announced in a couple weeks. I don't have any insider information like usual.
What do you think that's going to cost? Like $1,400?
That's the question, is price and size, right? And then, what did they fix with optics versus what are they fixing in camera? Like how bad is the distortion? Like all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, if they came in like 1,200, I think that would be really competitive, but probably 14, I would guess, because the 24 and 35 are both 1,400 for the 1.4s.
That makes sense then.
I would guess, unless 50s are more expensive to make. I just don't know, but...
Well, usually they're cheaper.
No, that's true. Like the nifty 50s are always cheaper than the 35s or the 24s or whatever. Yeah, I don't know, man. All right, so you have something you want to talk about in terms of GDU and Mutiny coming out with a new product?
Oh, this thing is pretty rad. Like I'm a big fan of Mutiny. I use them to build me some custom cables for my Komodo. I think they're doing some awesome battery and power solutions, but they partnered up with GDU Global Dynamics United to make this body cap. But this body cap is pretty cool because you can unscrew the body cap inside, and on the inside is an air tag. So worst case scenario, if somebody breaks into your car, grabs your camera bag if it's in there, typically what they do is they just chuck your bag and then they keep the camera. Well, now you can still have an air tag on the camera. So just a slick, anti-theft, keep track of your expensive camera gear stuff. So I bought a couple, one for my Komodo, one for my C70 or whatever. But they make them in a few different mounts, the RF, EF, PL, and E. So, yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's great because, I mean, air tags around fit in there nicely versus trying to shove them in a battery door. I've seen people try to stuff them in random places and cages and stuff. So
yeah, I know there are a few other implementations, but I think this is just slick because it doesn't look like you've put something onto your camera to house it, like everything's hidden inside a body cap. It just looks like a body cap. So nice work from Mutiny and GDU.
Very cool. All right, let's talk about some rumors, and then we'll get into the Canon stuff. Of course, more Sony rumors coming out. Andre over at Sony Alpha Rumors, she's like dripping out information here. The last one I saw was a new ZV style full frame fixed lens camera. So yeah, all he said was probably under $2,000. So probably not going to replace the RX cameras. I don't know much about those cameras, but those are they're pretty pricey and kind of cult classics from what I've seen. So he didn't say if it's going to be a prime lens or a zoom lens. So really curious about that. To me, ZV means no EVF. So I guess maybe they'll try their 8th try now at like a vlogging camera. Maybe they'll put a wide enough lens on it. We talked on the last episode about the A9 Mark III and the A7C Mark II. But now Andrea is saying that there's another camera in the works that's going to be sort of a higher end camera that we're all going to be, I'll say, quote, excited about, like something really interesting that might be announced in March. So,
and again, it's not in one of those lines, right?
Yeah, he didn't say what line. He is the rumor king, so he's gonna tease us to no end. I'm sure he knows, and he's just dragging us out. But we'll just sit there waiting for the little crumbs that he drops out. We have the Canon R8, the Canon R50, which we'll talk about in depth in this podcast. I also made a pretty heavy comparison video.
It was a great video, by the way.
Thank you, Brandon. I don't have the R8. I'm not like one of those people that gets cameras early, but having extensively tested the R6 Mark II, we'll get into that anyways. Let's briefly talk about the two lenses. The RF 24 to 50 f4.5 to 6.3 stabilized full frame lens going for $300. Do you have any thoughts on that one, Brandon?
Other than I don't care? No. Listen.
Spin the wheel.
When I got my camera, I got a kit lens. It was the 15 to 45, for the M50. Like that was, and I think that's still a lens that they kind of like made up to a point. Like it was still pretty current. But I mean, as soon as I got that lens, like I jumped right into like the 22 f2 STM, and I was like, this just like blows that other lens out of the water. So yeah, I don't know. That lens to me seems like we want you to buy this camera, and this now makes it a better value proposition because we're giving you a full frame utility lens. You probably don't know, you're just beginning, so just get the lens. But other than that, like I really have no interest in it.
Yeah, obviously me too. And we'll talk about how that works with the pricing and stuff once we get into the R8. Second lens is the RFS, and if you don't know, the S means it's for crop sensors. Like in the EF mount, it was EFS, and it's a 55 to 210 f5.1 to 7.1 stabilized for $350. Again, a kit lens, and it's interesting, but like, I mean, not in our world, but it's Sony actually makes that lens for their crop sensor line too, a 55 to 210.
Interesting. I think this lens is more interesting to me than the first kit lens, and on a crop sensor camera, I mean that's some pretty heavy reach. You said it's a 55 to 210.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's like 320 something
or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you're looking at almost like 350 mil. So, I mean, at that compression, if it's a pretty brightly lit day, that's still gonna look okay. But
yeah,
if your lighting conditions aren't right, like if you're at, what did you say? What's the N variable?
7.1.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to do very well in low light, that's for sure.
And on a crop sensor.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're cranking ISO like a mother to get something, And
if you're doing photography, you're going to have to crank your ISO if you're shooting anything fast, or because you're going to need a faster shutter speed. So
yeah.
I
don't know. It's interesting. It's a kit lens. That's what it is.
It's small. It's inexpensive, and I think it leads into the discussion we're going to have first about the R50, because I think that's a big part of the R50. If you guys don't know, the R50 is a very small entry-level APS-C mirrorless camera, and I actually want to call this the Costco camera. I was thinking of
perfectly.
I wanted to make a video and call it Canon R50 the Costco camera, but I don't want the backlash from it, so I'll just put it in. I'll just put it in the podcast. Hopefully, I can get away with it.
Josh, you know how many times I've told you to just let it fly. Like, just send it. And Josh is more kind than I am. Josh is like, no, I don't want to like ruffle too many feathers. And I'm just like, roll that dice, baby. But
yeah, I that's a whole nother discussion. I don't want to get into that whole thing today, but
I know what you're talking about, and it does make sense.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having the Costco cameras. And if you guys, think about it, when you go into Costco, there's cameras and computers and stuff like that. And people just want to buy a camera to film their kids, to film their family, to go on vacation. They're like, hey, I want something better than my phone with interchangeable lenses. Mm-hmm. I think this perfectly fits the bill. And that's what we're going to sort of talk about. Comes in black or white, Brandon.
Oh, man. That white, I had that white M50.
You had a white M50?
Yeah. Oh, I bought the white one. Guys, I told you, I'm very visual, and the black M50 just looked like a POS camera, and the white one was like, oh, hey, I'm here. Like, I've got a camera. I would never buy a white camera.
I'd be like, it's so weird. Unless I lived in like Miami, maybe. I don't know. I feel like
it's so funny because like I totally like weaseled my way into like a professional like sports shoot, at the ADCC, and everybody had like their 5D Mark IVs and their like Canon L, and I had a white Canon M50 with a Sigma 85 like 1.4. Like my camera was like this big, and then the lens was like this. And I'm sure so many people were like, what an ass. Like, what is this guy doing? But,
and you didn't know what you were doing, right?
I really didn't know what I was doing. I had a decent eye. I could like compose stuff. But I will say that even though I don't have interest in this camera anymore or these lenses anymore, you know, these could be solid first-time shooter cameras and lenses. And if that gets you into photography or videography, like, hey, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and there's some interesting stuff happening in this camera kind of behind the scenes that they kind of downplayed a little bit in the videos that I saw, so I want to talk about that stuff too. But let's get through some basic stuff here. It's shipping March 16th, so not a huge wait, about a month. And body only is $679. You can get it with the 18 to 45 kit lens for $800. And I think the white version comes with a silver lens.
Yeah.
I think. Okay.
The M50 did. There was a couple of silver variant lenses out there, if I remember.
Maybe they'll come out with like Costco has its own color, like you can get a blue one or something. You know what I mean?
Like a red. It's like blue and red.
That would be the Costco edition.
If that camera doesn't make it into Costco, I would be pretty bummed.
All right, so here's the Costco idea here. The 18 to 45 and the 55 to 210 you can get as a package for $10.29. So I see that as like being in like one of those like clear plastic, like you could see the camera and the lens.
Yeah,
like
they've got the thing just like Target does with like headphones and stuff, right? You've got your clear case and you're like, this is the camera I want. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I could see, like take it off, put it in your cart, you know, get that, and then you get your like, rotisserie chicken, and you're on your way.
You grab like the cardboard thing that's like, this is the camera combo I want, and you give that to the cashier, and then they go back in the lockup area, and then they pull it out for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, along with the rotisserie chicken and the sofa.
Yeah. I've heard that this is tangent here. Rotisserie chickens, they actually take a loss on those, but they get people to come in the store and they put them in the back of the store. I mean, how do you buy a chicken for $5 it's already cooked? You know what I mean? Or $6 or whatever it is.
I haven't shopped at Costco in a really long time, but I'm now going to go to Costco and see if I can get a whole chicken for $5.
I don't know. I haven't bought a rotisserie chicken in a while, but...
that seems too good to be true. There's probably salmonella in that chicken.
I'm not going to get into food quality and stuff like that. That is, again, a whole nother thing. All right, so what do we get in this camera? We got basically, it's the R10 smaller with less stuff going on. So 24.2 megapixel APS-C sensor, 1.6 times crop. You do get a 6K oversampled 4K image up to 30 frames a second.
Wow.
It shoots 1080p 120. It does not shoot like 4K 60 or anything like that.
What about the autofocus?
It's going to have like, Canon sort of modern autofocus. I'm not sure if it's the same level as like the R6 II and the R3. I'm not sure. I never tested the R10, so I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But it should be pretty good.
Because in the original M50, if you selected 4K, basically your camera exploded. It had
it's not like that
idea what to do. It was like,
it's
what
not
the
like that
hell?
anymore.
Ah!
No. I think the dual pixel autofocus, whatever version we're on, is the same in 4K. It doesn't have those. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's obviously a lot of limitations. There's no IBIS in the camera. You can't shoot in log. It shoots in 8-bit. Unless you shoot in HDR PQ, it'll shoot in 10-bit. So it is very, very limited for video. There's no mechanical shutter. You just have the electronic first curtain.
Okay.
So that's something they had to strip down out of the R10. Although I think the R10 has a mechanical shutter. From what I've seen, it has very few knobs, buttons, and dials. Like basically, it forces you to shoot in automatic. It's very hard to work it in manual control, which like you were saying, gets people into the system, gets them using a real camera.
It's funny. I've been trying to get my wife to buy like a real camera for her social media, live streaming, that sort of thing. And she is so I want zero friction that we eventually did get her a Fuji XS10, which is like $1,000 camera. Fantastic camera. But there's knobs and dials. And the moment she like picked it up and looked at it, she was like, no, it's too much. So, like in this R50 would probably be great for her because we just set it on auto and it's like, it's better than the phone. It's not a huge financial investment. And it gets people excited about making better videos and better photos. And, Canon's definitely like, great. And then the next camera they get might be an R7 or an R6 or something like that.
Right. So if they get the kit with the two lenses, it's like, oh, I can change lenses. Like I have a short lens and a long lens.
Yeah.
I'm
now
gonna go
a
shoot
wedding photographer.
Or I'm gonna go shoot my kids playing soccer. I'll put the long lens on. I can get a couple shots that I couldn't get on my cell phone, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. There's something that was introduced. Is there's some computational photography that got snuck into the backside of this camera, which they're not calling it that. I forget what the term is, but basically there's some like it'll do some automatic bracketing and sort of like exposure adjustments and stuff for you behind the scenes. It'll like choose the best thing for you. So it's interesting to see it sort of sneak in because I know there's been this like no computational photography in like non-cell phone stuff.
Yeah. Interesting.
So we'll see how that plays out. I think it's only in the like A+ mode, like the super automatic mode, and it's only in JPEGs. So it's not going to be for raw photos.
Gotcha. All right. Maybe I'll get an R50 just to dick around with it and we'll see.
Oh, you're going to have to go to Costco then.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have a card, so they'll let me in.
Okay.
Getting in is not the problem. Getting in and not dropping $40,000 on beef and cheese and a massive TV and apparently the R50, that's the problem.
All right.
We can move on now.
That's it. I think we beat the Costco joke down enough.
It's dead.
Okay. Sorry. Now we don't have to make the video. It's perfect. So there's a vertical movie mode in both this and the R8, which I didn't see too many people talking about. There weren't that many people that got this camera early to really like push out it.
I only saw a few.
So I don't know. That's a whole other thing. But I'm hoping, which I didn't even know was a thing, Brandon. I've only shot vertical video on my Sony cameras. And when I bring the image into the computer, it's already vertical. But you were saying it's...
I told you this. I was so pumped. Like, I shot my first reel with the FX3, and I pulled it into Final Cut Pro, and it was already, like, formatted to the vertical thing. And I was like, what the F? Like, did I do something wrong? Like, when I went to export, I was like, crap, did I, like, screw something up? Did I not do it right? Because if I do it on my R5C or my, my C70, it's vertical, but it's like really tiny, and I have to like zoom it in to like 190% to make it fit. And I was like, what's going on? It's so nice that the Sonys just do that automatically.
I didn't even know that was an issue on the Canon camera, so you told me that because I'd only shot vertical on the Sony. I was like, they don't do that, like maybe there's a mode where it switches the display too. It does it on the C70, right? When there's a vertical mode on the C70. Maybe it has something like that. That would be cool because I hate when I'm shooting vertical on the Sony and I'm always like looking sideways to, to adjust the settings.
Yeah, it's so nice that you could flip that. The Fujis do that.
They do too?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Let's see. So let's talk about why they made this camera. I mean,
the R8?
No, the R50. We're still on the R50.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it's it's a super beginner camera, and they're really just trying to get you into the Canon ecosystem. And maybe this is a discussion for a later time, but to me, I think they're kind of not exploiting, but taking advantage of the idea that cameras make the image, right? Sorry, I just whacked my softbox, so if it made some weird noise. Anyway, now that I've been doing this while, I know that lenses are so important. Lenses are what keeps me in the ecosystem. And I think Canon, like, making these cameras is like trying to take advantage of somebody that's new that thinks, oh, the camera makes the image. We always hear, oh, you must have a nice camera. And so to me, I don't know, it's weird. Like I said, this could be a discussion for another time. I wouldn't recommend these cameras simply because you're not going to have the lens ecosystem to keep you in the Canon ecosystem. So it's just like when we discussed this on the first episode, when you sent me this rumor, I slammed the thing down because I was like, God damn, stop making cameras and make the lenses that are going to keep me in the ecosystem.
So I think that bottom line is this is for a very different market than me and you and probably most people watching this. So that we have to keep that in mind, that this is for people that probably enjoy photography on their phones and say, I wish I had a better camera that has more of a zoom, or And maybe that's where their journey ends with photography or videography, and this is great for them. They love it. And maybe that's not the point of this camera. Maybe this is like, then you get a different camera after this. Maybe this isn't a camera to really grow with, because it's really hard to shoot manual on this camera. I think there's only one like exposure dial. I mean, it's not really made for advanced photography.
Yeah, I think when you said like, hey, maybe this is where your photography ends, or this just gets you in the system, maybe it's not for like people like us who are, I hate using the word at this level because it makes me sound like a tool, but we are further along and we're more advanced than the absolute beginner. That's totally fine. Like I said, if it just gets them into photography and videography, great. But yeah, if you really don't have much of an option to shoot manual, if it makes it really tough, then it's almost like we built this to just get you a little bit excited, but now we're going to have some like, e-waste, because you're going to ditch this camera within like 6 months to a year, and you're going to have to move to something else. I was really disappointed because I probably would have kept the M50 for longer, but there were very few lenses for that camera. So I felt like I felt compelled, like, hey, I'm going to have to upgrade because this isn't going to go where I wanted it to go. But it had more manual control than it sounds like this camera does.
Did you ever use EF lenses on your M50?
Yeah, I absolutely did. That was that Sigma. I got a converter, I got an adapter, and then I used that Sigma EF 85 art lens. I used that one, and I used the 105. So I felt like, hey, like I could do what I wanted to do with it, but they were huge, massive lenses that I had to rent because I couldn't afford them at the time. And the only thing available were some weird EFMs that just weren't the lenses that I was looking for. And they basically like crushed that line as soon as they made it. It seemed like.
Yeah, there was one more. They came out with the M6 Mark II, and then they came out with the M50 Mark II, which was like barely better than the M50. And then it was like, okay, enough of this.
It was a software update.
All right, so besides the lens options, which are limited for the RF system, and especially in terms of price, size, and APS-C, because if you buy a $600 camera, you're probably not buying a $1,500 or $2,000 lens, most likely.
Yeah.
So besides that and having more controls, I wish that there were a few more so people could sort of grow into the camera a little bit. But besides that, there's not really much that bothers me about this, other than you brought up a good point about if that's where it ends and it just becomes e-waste, like that sucks. But
yeah,
I mean, it's a pretty inexpensive camera.
Yeah. Your phone costs way more than that, and the idea is like, hey, we want something that's a little bit better than the phone, something that's not going to break the bank. So if you don't really enjoy photography or videography, then you don't feel like you've spent, a whole lot of money. All
right, looking into the R8.
Let's do it.
All right, because that's kind of the meat and the potatoes here. All right, so if you haven't seen that already, I did make a pretty detailed video about the R8 versus the R6 too, and also did talk about the R7 a little bit. So I'll leave that down in the description if you want to check that video out. But I want to go through some of the stuff here just to sort of rehash it if people haven't seen that. We'll try to get through it pretty quickly. First of all, the price, so $1,500, which is very aggressive. Or you can get it for $1,700 with that 24 to 50 kit lens. So I think really the price is the main driver with this camera. And to me, I see this as being the Best Buy camera.
Okay, so we've stepped up from Costco, and we're now entering Best Buy territory.
So people that walk into Best Buy, they go, all right, I want a full-frame camera. Mm-hmm. And they look and they see the Canon. Oh, I know Canon. They make good cameras. $1,500, $1,700 with a lens, full frame?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty good. Versus they're looking at Sony for $2,500 for the A7 IV. I mean,
and they're getting it out before that new A7C Mark II.
And I don't think that's going to be $1,500.
Yeah. So the price point and being first to market, even though it's not technically first to market, in this new round of cameras, it's kind of like first to market. That's a good thing. I'm sorry, like my screensaver just decided to show up, and it's blasting peak light on me, and I can't get it to turn off. So you're going to have to deal with it out there. I can't
All right,
do anything about it.
I'm sorry, Brandon. So, yeah, I think a lot of the decisions about what went in or did not go into the R8 were really all about price. And I've seen this move from other companies too, with reusing parts. Like they took the RP body, which is Canon's least expensive mirrorless camera, one of their two first cameras they came out with for full frame mirrorless, and they shoved an R6 inside. They used the same sensor, you get the same video specs, codecs, everything is about the R6 too, but they took out IBIS, which we could talk about first. So IBIS, it was really interesting to me. I think that was a huge omission. Obviously, it was to save price, size, weight, and probably heat, I'm guessing, and battery, because it has the small battery. Which
it's got the RP battery,
which is a joke if you're shooting 4K video. Like it's going to be.
No. Out of every omission that you mentioned in your video, and what they left out, to me, that's probably the biggest one, is the battery.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one for a lot of people. I think if you're doing photography, maybe it's a little bit more forgiving, but for video, you're going to be chewing through those batteries, and then you're like, oh, I just got this camera for $1,500, but you need a pocket full of batteries.
Yeah.
And then each of those are probably $80 a pop or whatever.
Yeah, it is an interesting camera. And the more I thought about this last night and this morning, I don't know if you've ever heard this saying, there's no bad weather, there's just bad clothing decisions.
I've heard it in a different way, but yeah.
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 The more I'm starting to think, there are plenty of things that Canon are doing that are head scratchers, let's be honest. But when it comes to cameras, I kind of want to apply the same philosophy, that there are no bad cameras, there's just bad consumers. And it's just, I'm buying a camera and putting it into a situation that it really wasn't designed for. Not necessarily that the camera doesn't have everything that I need it to have. And I think this camera is kind of like that. I think you did a really good job of figuring out in your video where this camera would shine. And there are a few situations, and I think photography is one of those where it would shine, but because of the battery limitations, probably not video unless you have it strapped to mains in a studio somewhere. And so I think if it falls out of those two situations, you're probably going to find yourself maybe a little unhappy with that camera.
That's a great point. And I want to get through some of the specs first, but let's talk about, while we're on this, talk about sort of the use cases that we see this for. Because it's missing a lot of the more pro or prosumer level features that we will talk about, I think it really is geared towards not entry level, but people getting serious about photography, because I think the RP was a great starting point for a lot of people. I couldn't believe that camera was under $1,000. And in some ways, I wish they took out even more out of this camera to make it even cheaper for photography. But they left a lot of video stuff in it, so it is more expensive.
Yeah.
So I think it's great for that. I also do think it's great in a studio setting if it doesn't overheat. So that's a big question mark that I have, because every time you have a camera that does oversampled video and does not have a fan, my first question is, how long does it run before it overheats, right?
Do you think that's why they put some of those odd recording limits in it? Because I know it has a 2-hour recording limit, but it's in a certain setting. And if you go to a different setting, the recording limit is halved. And if you go to a different setting, it's halved even more.
So 4K 24, 4K 30, it's supposed to run for 2 hours, and that's not a heat warning. That's a just time limit, straight up old school time limit. The battery is only going to last an hour, so that's only going to apply if you are running off mains, really.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, because obviously when they take out the IBIS, they're reducing the heat. That was one of the things I heard about the R5C, was we took out the IBIS because of heat, and also the video stuff, which I do want to talk about too, because some people actually don't want IBIS in this camera. But yeah, I think studio is a great example. I also think, because if it doesn't overheat, For $1,500, you get a full frame camera that matches the R6 Mark II, matches pretty similarly to cameras like the R5, R3, stuff like that. It's full frame, RF mount. You got 4K 60. You got all that stuff in there. So it would be great for that. I also think, as I said, it's a good B or C camera. But if you're marketing this on the cheaper side, which they are at $1,500 for a full frame camera, I really do think IBIS is an issue. Not having IBIS is an issue for most people who are buying this as like a vlogging, travel, content creation camera.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Having IBIS as a photographer is actually really nice. You know, if you want to do some handheld, long distance shots, like having IBIS is really nice. And Canon's really good at IBIS. When it comes to video, yes and no. I have like mixed feelings on it because I had it in the R5 and it was like really handy in some situations, but all of my cameras that I currently have don't have IBIS. And I like it just as much. You know, you just got to rig the camera differently. But
so are the issues the wobbles on the wide end? Is that the issues for you?
Yeah, I guess, you know, but it's one of those things where there are certain things that I'm just like, I don't really care. And wobbles on the wide end has never bothered me that much. Like people freaked out about the overheating on the R5 and I shot in such a style that I never had to deal with it. So I was like, I don't really care. I think the IBIS for this camera really comes down to like body size. Like that body is so freaking thin.
It's tiny.
So I just don't think they could have put it in there.
Right. Well, I think the main reason is to save on money. I mean, we got to get the price down on this thing.
Yep.
So let's think about how this actually works with the lenses that are out there. So if you don't have stabilization in the body and you want to do some handheld video, you got to get a lens that has stabilization, right? Mm-hmm. Those lenses are big, heavy, and expensive.
Yes.
In the RF mount. And they're not going to match that camera body. That camera body's tiny with one of those huge RF lenses. That's not going to feel very good.
It's not. It's going to be super front heavy. It's not going to be very, very friendly to your wrists. That's for sure.
Or your wallet.
Yeah, you're going to drop $1,500 on that camera, and then you're going to spend another $2,500 on your lens, and you're going to be like, "Holy crap!" Like, is that money better served in a different system? Probably.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that really the wide end wobbles on the IBIS system really do bother them. I had a lot of people comment on my video saying like, "I'm glad they took IBIS out because it sucks, and I'd rather not have it." And so I thought that was an interesting way to put it. I just wish that Canon would let you have like independently control IBIS and lens stab, because if you don't know, you can only have like in the cameras of IBIS, if you turn IBIS on, it's also turn the lens stab on or both off. You can't do one or the other. If they just unlock that, it would make everybody happy.
It would be pretty rad, that's for sure. They're like, you know, every company has got some of these weird things where we're like, why don't you just pull your head out and do this? Like, is it really that hard? How has this not been communicated to you? There's a button, turn it off. Nikon figured it out. How can you not figure it out?
Yeah, Sony too. I mean, all right. So IBIS, that's a thing. Some people were happy about it. Some people didn't care. Some people were really upset about it. I think a lot of people were more upset about the battery than the IBIS, honestly.
So for me, one of the things that kind of irks me about what Canon's doing right now is what Sony is really good at, and that's the segmentation, the designation of where their cameras fit. And so if you're a new person, you know really easily what like avenue you should be getting to. Do you want like a fast action sports and wildlife shooter? Well, then get the A9 series. If you want something that excels at video, get the S series, you know, or an FX series. Canon keeps coming out with these numbers that if you're not like really familiar with Canon, you have no idea where you sit. Like, is the R8 better than the R7? But the R8's full frame and the R7's, you know, APS-C. Right. Like, it's really hard to understand like where they sit in a hierarchy. And so for me, this camera is like, it sits in a weird spot.
Yeah, it definitely does. So I do want to talk about the market and the distinction of categories and stuff, but I want to finish up the specs really quickly. So some of the professional stuff we're talking about, no mechanical shutter, So it does have that first curtain electronic, but no full mechanical shutter, which for some situations like banding and things like that, it's helpful to have a mechanical shutter. Also, I wanted to be able to just cover the sensor when the camera turns off.
Yeah.
That's like such a nice feature. We already talked about the smaller battery. Single card slot, which is absolutely a huge step back for people doing any sort of professional work. I always dual record when I'm doing client work.
Yeah.
So
I get it, but again, like, is this a professional camera?
that's the question. I'm just comparing this with the R6 II. These are like the things you're losing.
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
If we're comparing it to the R6 II, sure. Like if you think you need those things, save the money and get the R6 II. But
100%.
if this is your first and or second camera and you're not doing like gnarly paid stuff, like, no, you don't, like, whatever.
Yeah. There are some other differences too, like you lose the 6K external recording. There's no joystick on the back for controlling focus. We talked about the 2-hour record limit in 4K. There's another record limit in like 1080p slow modes, which I don't think really matters. So those are kind of the big differences. But like you said, is this a pro camera? And if you're looking for a pro camera, you should save more money. Like this is not that camera.
This is not a pro camera. No. And I think I'm to the point now where if people are starting to ask me what camera should I get, I just don't even mention a Canon at this point. I know that's weird, but it's like, again, like lensing keeps you in the ecosystem. And right now Canon doesn't have lenses that keep you in the ecosystem. So even though this might be a great camera and it's $1,500 and it's full frame and it offers lots of stuff, like think long term. Think at least 2 or 3 years out. I would, at this point, I would go with a different thing. But I mean, if you're a photographer and you want full frame, I mean, it shoots 40 frames a second. I don't know what the buffer is going to be on that. But this is a pretty rad camera. It's just ergonomically, it's going to be freaking weird if you throw, you know, if you bought like that 85 1.2 and tried to put it on this camera, like you're going to have like carpal tunnel in a week.
Yeah, or like a 7200 or the 100 to 500 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just can't even hold it. It's like, you know, it's just like...
I fear for the mount itself. Like, do I need to put rods? Do I need to put like a rod support system on this thing?
Just hold it by the lens. Like, no matter what the lens is, treat it like it's a telephoto.
Yeah, that body is like that thin. It's crazy thin.
For a full frame, yeah, that's true too. We'll see how that goes, man.
I wonder if it's like, oh, my mount broke. I wonder how many mount breaks are going to happen.
All right, so we sort of designated this as a non-pro or non-prosumer camera, but great as entry-level photography, maybe a studio camera. There's some great stuff, like you said, for photography. This has a really nice sensor in it, obviously out of the R6 Mark II. Has amazing autofocus, and you do get that oversampled video. They threw the false color in there too, which was kind of surprising, but they're just like, take this thing we already have, just put it in there.
Dude, I'm telling you, the monkeys at Canon are spinning that freaking options wheel, and they're just landing on some weird shit. I'm not going to lie. Here's the thing. I would consider this camera as just a photo camera. Like
okay,
if it was me just having a camera to go out and shoot because it's small, it's lightweight. Yeah, the ergonomics are going to kind of suck, but I don't need a second card because I'm not shooting anything paid. If I'm shooting something paid, I'm going a different route. But if this is just like my walk around travel camera, but I want it to have a beautiful image, like this is a doable camera, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, it's just lenses, man. They're going to be big lenses.
Yeah.
It's going to be like cumbersome to hold is the only thing. Probably someone mentioned like maybe putting a battery grip on it. I think that would be a good addition for photography, just to like get more of a grip on the camera, have more battery life. I think that might. But then we're adding money to this cheap camera to fix. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Or you just stick to that 1.8 line.
Yeah, or I shouldn't say cheap camera. It's still $1,500, but
$1,500 is still a decent amount of money. But like if you know, ergos and these big lenses become a problem, like, yeah, it's like maybe this camera was designed to really just take advantage of those 1.8s. I don't know.
So my struggle with this mainly is like for a photography camera, I just wish it was a little bit cheaper. That's the issue for me. Like I'd love to see $1,200, $1,000 for a full frame, you know, photography camera, but they snuck in all that video stuff, so it's going to get pricier, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, do you think this camera would be better suited and less confusing if they took out even more video options and like, hey, this is really like just an awesome full frame, cheap photo camera?
I think that makes sense. I think that comes down to Canon's strategy, which you were talking about before, is they have all these cameras and you're just confused what to buy because they all kind of do sort of the same thing, but just a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
I was talking to Cam Mackey again the other day, and he made this like really interesting observation. He said, with Sony, you have choices. With Canon, you have workarounds. And that's and I think it like perfectly fits. Because like right now, even with this camera, you're like, oh God, like I'm already stressing about like, what do I pair with this? And then, okay, if I grab this, then this becomes a problem. Like if I grab the 85 1.2, yeah, I just spent like $3,000 on a lens and I got a $1,500 camera, but now my mount breaks. Ah, God damn it. You know, like. So,
you like how we went there immediately? I was like, oh, let's get a battery grip. And you're like, oh, well, we'll just use these lenses, or maybe we need rod system, or
That's how my brain is now programmed to think as a Canon shooter.
I'm there
like,
too, man.
I have like just like a breakdown. Like I have to like, you know, use the key and unbuckle the case and break in case of emergency. And then I pull out my Canon like compromise list and I go, okay, what are my workarounds? You're like a technical engineer giving me a diagram on how to make things work.
All right, so I got a question for you, Brandon. Are they going to sell a lot of these cameras? What do you think?
At $1,500, like, yeah, they should. But this isn't the R7 $1,500?
It is, yeah.
Dude, I would recommend an R7 over this camera.
In
like
a lot of ways,
times
I
out
would
of 10.
too.
Yeah,
yeah.
But are they going to sell a lot of this?
Yeah.
I would say they would, because again, I think Canon's game plan, or at least how they're making cameras, is like, you don't know anything about cameras, and we're going to try to take advantage of that by selling you like a camera rather than like a complete ecosystem.
So do you think it's just price? You want a Canon camera, how much do you have to spend? Is that really like what it comes down to?
I think so. I think when I look at different companies and their philosophy around how they're, you know, trying to get you into the ecosystem, Canon's is very much like, this is, you know, it's $1,500. The next one is $2,000. It just seems like you're always like, okay, well, the next camera is this amount of money. It's very much a money-driven system. And I know anybody listening to this would be like, duh, it's a business. Like, they got to make money. I get that. But if you look at, you know, Panasonic, that is not the way they operate. Like, there's a different way they go about delivering products to you. The same with Sony. It's just the segmentation lets you know that this is different. The fact that they put S-Log3 in all of their cameras. I think Canon is very much like a price-driven tier system.
So the reason I ask that is because they obviously know what they're doing. Like, we're as content creators, as videographers, filmmakers, and a lot of people watching this, we have opinions about what we want. Mm-hmm. But they obviously have done their own market research and think that this is a good idea. Now, that being said, I don't know anyone who asked for this camera. It seems like these cameras come out of nowhere. And you have companies like Sony, Panasonic, you know, Fuji, that are listening to their customers and saying, like, what are the people wanting? We'll make that. Yeah. I don't see that happening at all here. And that's what gets me frustrated. They're not listening to what we ask. But sometimes I think, let me take a step back here and not be selfish and think, what do I want versus what's going to be profitable for them? Are we just like the loudest group? Maybe we're just like 0.1% of the market. You know what I mean? I have no idea about those numbers.
I think that is, what is the saying? Like, you can't see the forest through the trees?
Yeah.
Like, we are obviously the loudest group because we're the most in this segment. Like, the people that are listening to the podcast are like the nerds and the people that are really into photography. And I think about how many people are just on YouTube. That's a shitload of people. And how many people do exactly what we do? That's very, you know, like, we are the minority for sure. And so we get hung up on this kind of stuff, whereas like just your regular run-of-the-mill person probably doesn't care and they don't even know.
So they probably will sell a lot of these at Best Buy. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, I think the person that's like, video and photo are becoming so much more important to like the social media ecosystem. I need a full frame case. I heard full frame. I heard that term. I got to get a full frame. Oh, how much is that camera? That's $6,000. I don't have $6,000. Like TikTok doesn't pay me that much. Oh, $1,500. Done.
1,700 with a lens out the door.
Boom. Give it to me.
Don't forget the 5 batteries you're going to need, but don't talk about that till you figure that out later.
Yeah. I'll get that later.
Yeah. All right, so let's try to move this along a little bit. So, what do we want Canon to come out with? Because clearly we have ideas here. I'll throw out a couple things.
I want Canon to come out with lenses.
We need third-party lenses to help out because the pace is just, and they're coming out with all these lenses that we're not excited about and we're not talking about.
Josh, I didn't tell you this, but the other day when I went into the camera store to actually like look at the FX3 and like try to rent one and whatever, the guy that I was talking to told me that they had recently had 2 of the lens designers for Canon in Japan there. Like 2 of the people that were in charge of lens design for Canon. This store here in Salt Lake is a pretty big Canon like company. What do they call it? Like they're a dealer, whatever.
Authorized dealer.
Yeah. So they had 2 Canon lens designers straight from Japan in there, and the guy had asked them like, what's going on with third-party lenses? Like, what's going on with your roadmap? And basically the only thing he could tell me was, it doesn't look good. And I'm like, God, yeah, like it doesn't look good a year from now. It doesn't look good 3 years from now. And it was definitely more of the latter. So that to me is, there's somebody that made a comment on our first video. They said there are more cameras than there are lenses right now. And that's definitely the way it feels. And that is not good. That is not good.
So isn't that what you need? You buy 1 lens and buy 4 cameras depending on what you...
Yeah.
No, it's the other way. Yeah, it's the other way around. So I think, like we were saying before, is that all their cameras are very similar with slight differences at different price points. I would like to see them segment their cameras a little bit better. Mm-hmm. I would like to see a video-centric mirrorless size camera. Like, let's see an FX3 style camera.
Yeah. That would be rad if I had an FX3 competitor.
Like, not the R5C. That was a Frankenstein whatever. Like I'm not fill in the blank. Let's get some actual let's get that $1,200 full frame photo camera.
Yeah.
And put up a small prime set together with that for like $2,000, or something like that. Let's get some of that. Let's understand what we're buying. I think that's the tricky part. And for them to be competitive, we need C-Log 2, we need full-size HDMI ports, and we need lenses. Those are my biggest things to ask for.
I was thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, here are the things that are like, this has to happen at certain price points or designations. If you designate a camera as a cinema camera, whether that's an FX or you put a C on it, it has to have shutter angle, it has to have false color, it has to have a waveform. Like, those are non-negotiables because you said it was a cinema camera. Like, those are just things that you need in a cinema camera.
And it should have the highest level log profile.
Yeah. To me, maybe. We can agree to disagree on that.
Okay.
But
okay.
At a certain cost, it should absolutely have a full-size HDMI. No.
100%.
Anything over $2,000 should have a full-size HDMI. And if somebody comes at me in the comments and says, well, the R5C is just using the R5 body, go screw yourself, because that's a lie. That's a total lie. Like a $4,800 camera, $4,500 now, should absolutely have a full-size HDMI. If you can put the battery switch, like if you could come up with a completely new battery on-off photo video switch, if you can put like time code port on there, a fan, a completely different EVF, you could have put a full-size HDMI on there. I'm getting heated. But these are things that I'm just like, absolutely, if you're going to designate a camera a certain way, it should have certain features. If it costs $6,000, it should absolutely have full-size HDMI or SDI. These are non-negotiables.
You're
Okay,
getting
I'm
heated
done.
because you're talking about Canon. That makes sense.
I'm getting to, well, and about Sony. Like, I've got the FX3, and the fact that it doesn't have false color, shutter angle, or waveform, I'm like,
I
what
know.
the hell? This is a cinema camera. You like literally
Even their
put it in
FX6
this.
doesn't have false color, which is annoying for sure, but it does have shutter angle.
You're like, hey, you put it in your advertisements in the cinema line. Like, put it in there. It's a software update. That's absolutely a non-negotiable. It should have it. Now, whether it should be more powerful or have like a different log profile or whatever, that's where we maybe agree to disagree. Maybe that's like a different price point thing. But things like exposure tools absolutely should not be like I have to spend another $3,000 to get better exposure tool. No, it's a cinema camera. It should be in there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to your point about the HDMI port, like the R3 is 6,000, sorry, now 5,600, but that has a micro HDMI port. That is a professional body, professional camera, their most expensive mirrorless camera at the moment. That's crazy.
Dude, if I was a Canon exec and I was like, this has a micro HDMI port. Oh, that Fuji XS10 has a micro HDMI port. I'd be like, what the F? We're as good as a Fuji XS10? Well,
I think it goes back to your point before.
$4,300?
It's
more?
it's the profit model. It's that whole decision making process. I think really plays into it.
There are some heads up butts.
All right, so, all right, we've been talking for a while, Brandon. I know we didn't want to make this like a 3-hour podcast, although
how long have we been talking for? Holy shit!
Probably like
2 hours?
I know, dude. I was trying to move it along here, buddy. Then you get all heated, and I was trying to
me.
make the joke about overheating, but
that's my fault.
You were too. No, it's all good. It's it needs to be said, man. It's funny, like we get so worked up on HDMI port, but man, it makes such a difference.
These
right, so
yeah.
I want to talk about the rest of the market before we jump off here.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to talk about Sony because it's Canon and Sony most of the time that we're talking about as the main players here. But for me, what I think about this is this does put pressure. I always think about when a camera comes out, what does this mean for the competitors? Mm-hmm. And so for Sony, I see this as pressure to put out some cheaper cameras because I think we're still waiting on that APS-C line that like I'm calling it the 7000 series cameras, like the 6000s, but like the newer version of them. Mm-hmm. We need to see some cheaper cameras. They need a full frame camera under $2,000, like a modern one.
Well,
I think that's going to.
Is that going to be that A7C Mark II?
If that is the innards of the A7 IV and it comes out under $2,000, like why would you buy the A7 IV? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, because it doesn't have an EVF.
Are they gonna take out IBIS? Are they gonna?
Yeah, I don't know. It's,
one card slot, smaller battery. Maybe they're gonna pull an R8 on the A7 IV.
I totally agree, though. It does put some pressure on Sony, and Sony goes, "Okay, we got to create we got to create our own $1,500 full frame camera."
Yeah, which is great because we need more inexpensive options out there. Just for not everyone has all the same budgets. Everyone's got a different budget.
Yeah.
What about any of the other brands? Any thoughts about how this influences anybody else?
Not necessarily, because Panasonic, I think has made some waves with the S5 Mark II, and I think they're going to ride that for a while. I think they got their own niche. They're good. Fuji, no, because Fuji's like, we're either doing medium format or we're doing APS-C, and they kind of rule both of those spaces, honestly. So, no. I don't think so. OM Systems makes micro Four Thirds cameras, so they're not in this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it seems like Fuji and Panasonic have sort of carved out their niches, mm-hmm. and Canon and Sony are battling it out for everything else.
Yeah, there's blood. There will be blood.
All right. So any other thoughts to wrap up the Canon releases here?
Just don't buy one right now. As a person that's tens of $1,000s into a Canon system,
all right, so we won't put any affiliate links in the description down below because Brandon doesn't want you to buy anything.
Hey, no, I need that money.
All right, so with that in mind, please go check out Brandon's channels when you get a chance, and go show him some love over there. Just joking around, but not really.
No, I appreciate it. No, I think we're good. I think this this year, you know, like I got my Sony and I've been stirring whether or not I should like switch systems. And even though Canon isn't doing the right things in the lens situation, I don't know if I would switch systems quite yet. I want to wait this year. I want to see what 2023 brings to see if the monkeys at Canon actually like change direction, or if they want to, you know, plow this boat into some cliffs somewhere. And if that's the case, then I can always jump ship.
Okay, before it hits the cliffs. All right,
Yeah.
so not every episode is going to be about Canon and Sony, but of course this is on our minds right now with new
Yeah.
releases, so that's what we're talking about because that's sort of current. So please send in topic ideas, comments, questions, things you'd like us to talk about, and if you send us a little video clip, we'll put it in one of the episodes too. So there's
Because I'm in charge.
because Brandon's doing the editing and he loves including clips,
Yes.
especially from people. So, and we want to involve all of you. That's why we're doing this. If you couldn't already tell, we're having a great time with this, and we'll be putting out these videos every week. So thank you so much for watching. Hit subscribe if you're this far late in the video, and we'll see you guys real soon.
Peace.